Book 3, Chapter 3 of the Brothers Karamazov. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoyevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. Book 3, Chapter 3. The Confession of a Passionate Heart in Verse. Alyosha remained for some time irresolute after hearing the command his father shouted to him from the carriage, but in spite of his uneasiness he did not stand still. That was not his way. He went at once to the kitchen to find out what his father had been doing above. Then he set off, trusting that on the way he would find some answer to the doubt tormenting him. I hasten to add that his father's shouts commanding him to return home with his mattress and pillow did not frighten him in the least. He understood perfectly that those peremptory shouts were merely a flourish to produce an effect. In the same way, a tradesman in our town who was celebrating his name-day with a party of friends, getting angry at being refused more vodka, smashed up his own crockery and furniture and tore his own and his wife's clothes, and finally broke his windows, all for the sake of effect. Next day, of course, when he was sober, he regretted the broken cups and saucers. Alyosha knew his father would let him go back to the monastery next day, possibly even that evening. Moreover, he was fully persuaded that his father might hurt anyone else, but would not hurt him. Alyosha was certain that no one in the whole world would ever want to hurt him, and what is more, he knew that no one could hurt him. This was for him an axiom, assumed once for all without question, and he went his way without hesitation, relying on it. But at that moment an anxiety of a different sort disturbed him, and worried him the more because he could not formulate it. It was the fear of a woman, of Katerina Ivanovna, who had so urgently entreated him in the note handed to him by Madame Hoflakov to come and see her about something. This request and the necessity of going had at once aroused an uneasy feeling in his heart, and this feeling had grown more and more painful all the morning, in spite of the scenes at the hermitage and at the Father Superior's. He was not uneasy, because he did not know what she would speak of, and what he must answer, and he was not afraid of her simply as a woman. Though he knew little of women, he had spent his life from early childhood till he entered the monastery entirely with women. He was afraid of that woman, Katerina Ivanovna. He had been afraid of her from the first time he saw her. He had only seen her 2 or 3 times, and had only chanced to say a few words to her. He thought of her as a beautiful, proud, imperious girl. It was not her beauty which troubled him, but something else. And the vagueness of his apprehension increased the apprehension itself. The girl's aims were of the noblest. He knew that. She was trying to save his brother Dmitri simply through generosity, though he had already behaved badly to her. Yet although Alyosha recognized and did justice to all these fine and generous sentiments, a shiver began to run down his back as soon as he drew near her house. He reflected that he would not find Ivan, who was so intimate a friend with her, for Ivan was certainly now with his father. Dmitri he was even more certain not to find there, and he had a foreboding of the reason. And so his conversation would be with her alone. He had a great longing to run and see his brother Dmitri before that fateful interview. Without showing him the letter, he could talk to him about it. But Dmitri lived a long way off, and he was sure to be away from home too. Standing still for a minute, he reached a final decision. Crossing himself with a rapid and accustomed gesture, and at once smiling, he turned resolutely in the direction of his terrible lady. He knew her house. If he went by the high street and then across the marketplace, it was a long way round. Though our town is small, it is scattered, and the houses are far apart. And meanwhile his father was expecting him, and perhaps had not yet forgotten his command. He might be unreasonable, and so he had to make haste to get there and back. So he decided to take a short cut, by the back way, for he knew every inch of the ground. This meant skirting fences, climbing over hurdles, and crossing other people's backyards, where everyone he met knew him and greeted him. In this way he could reach the high street in half the time. He had to pass the garden adjoining his father's, and belonging to a little tumble-down house with 4 widows. The owner of this house, as Alyosha knew, was a bedridden old woman, living with her daughter, who had been a genteel maidservant in the general's families in Petersburg. Now she had been at home a year, looking after her sick mother. She always dressed up in fine clothes, though her old mother and she had sunk into such poverty that they went every day to Fyodor Pavlovitch's kitchen for soup and bread, which Marfa gave readily. Yet though the young woman came up for soup, she had never sold any of her dresses, and one of these even had a long train, a fact which Alyosha had learned from Rakitin, who always knew everything that was going on in the town. He had forgotten it as soon as he had heard it, but now, on reaching the garden, he remembered the dress with the train, raised his head, which had been bowed in thought, and came upon something quite unexpected. Over the hurdle in the garden, Dmitri, mounted on something, was leaning forward, gesticulating violently, beckoning to him, obviously afraid to utter a word for fear of being overheard. Alyosha ran up to the hurdle. "It's a good thing you looked up. I was nearly shouting to you," Mitya said in a joyful, hurried whisper. "Climb in here quickly. How splendid that you've come. I was just thinking of you." Alyosha was delighted too, but he did not know how to get over the hurdle. Mitya put his powerful hand under his elbow to help him jump. Tucking up his cassock, Alyosha leapt over the hurdle with the agility of a bare-legged street urchin. "Well done! Now come along," said Mitya in an enthusiastic whisper. "Where?" whispered Alyosha, looking about him and finding himself in a deserted garden, with no one near but themselves. The garden was small, but the house was at least 50 paces away. "There's no one here. Why do you whisper?" asked Alyosha. "Why do I whisper? Deuce take it!" cried Dmitri at the top of his voice. "You see what silly tricks nature plays on one. I'm here in secret, and on the watch. I'll explain later on, but knowing it's a secret, I began whispering like a fool when there's no need. Let us go. Over there. Till then be quiet. I want to kiss you." Glory, glory to God in the world. Glory to God in me. I was just repeating that, sitting here before you came. The garden was about 3 acres in extent, and planted with trees only along the fence at the 4 sides. There were apple trees, maples, limes, and birch trees. The middle of the garden was an empty grass space from which several hundredweight of hay was carried in the summer. The garden was let out for a few roubles for the summer. There were also plantations of raspberries and currants and gooseberries laid out along the sides. A kitchen garden had been planted lately near the house. Dmitri led his brother to the most secluded corner of the garden. There, in a thicket of lime trees and old bushes of black currant, elder, snowball tree, and lilac, there stood a tumble-down green summer house, blackened with age. Its walls were of lattice-work, but there was still a roof which could give shelter. God knows when this summer house was built. There was a tradition that it had been put up some 50 years before by a retired colonel called von Schmidt, who owned the house at the time. It was all in decay. The floor was rotting, the planks were loose, the woodwork smelled musty. In the summer house there was a green wooden table fixed in the ground, and round it were some green benches upon which it was still possible to sit. Alyosha had at once observed his brother's accelerated condition, and on entering the arbor he saw half a bottle of brandy and a wine-glass on the table. "That's brandy," Mitya laughed. "I see your look. He's drinking again. Distrust the apparition. Distrust the worthless, lying crowd, and lay aside thy doubts. I'm not drinking. I'm only indulging. As that pig your Rakitin says, he'll be a civil councillor one day, but he'll always talk about indulging. Sit down. I could take you in my arms, Alyosha, and press you to my bosom till I crush you, for in the whole world, in reality, can you take it in? I love no one but you." He uttered the last words in a sort of exultation. "No one but you and one jade I have fallen in love with, to my ruin. But being in love doesn't mean loving. You may be in love with a woman and yet hate her. Remember that. I can talk about it gaily still. Sit down here by the table, and I'll sit beside you and look at you and go on talking. You shall keep quiet, and I'll go on talking, for the time has come. But on reflection, you know, I'd better speak quietly, for here you can never tell what ears are listening. I will explain everything, As they say, the story will be continued. Why have I been longing for you? Why have I been thirsting for you all these days, and just now? It's 5 days since I've cast anchor here. Because it's only to you I can tell everything. Because I must. Because I need you. Because tomorrow I shall fly from the clouds. Because tomorrow life is ending and beginning. Have you ever dreamt of falling down a precipice into a pit? That's just how I'm falling, but not in a dream. And I'm not afraid, and don't you be afraid. At least, I am afraid, but I enjoy it. It's not enjoyment, though, but ecstasy. Damn it all, whatever it is, a strong spirit, a weak spirit, a womanish spirit, whatever it is, let us praise nature. You see what sunshine, how clear the sky is. The leaves are all green. It's still summer. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and the stillness. Where were you going? I was going to father's, but I meant to go to Katerina Ivanovna's first. To her? And to father? Ha! What a coincidence! Why was I waiting for you, hungering and thirsting for you in every cranny of my soul and even in my ribs? Why, to send you to father and to her, Katerina Ivanovna, so as to have done with her and with father. To send an angel. I might have sent anyone, but I wanted to send an angel. And here you are, on your way to see father and her. Did you really mean to send me? Cried Alyosha with a distressed expression. Stay! You knew it, and I see you understand it all at once. But be quiet for a time. Don't be sorry and don't cry. Dmitri stood up, thought a moment, and put his finger to his forehead. She's asked you, written to you a letter or something. That's why you're going to her? You wouldn't be going except for that. Here is her note. Alyosha took it out of his pocket. Mitya looked through it quickly. And you were going the back way. Oh, gods! I thank you for sending him by the back way. And he came to me like the golden fish to the silly old fisherman in the fable. Listen, Alyosha. Listen, brother. Now I mean to tell you everything, for I must tell someone. An angel in heaven I've told already, but I want to tell an angel on earth. You are an angel on earth. You will hear and judge and forgive. And that's what I need, that someone above me should forgive. Listen, if 2 people break away from everything on earth and fly off into the unknown, or at least one of them, and before flying off or going to ruin he comes to someone else and says, "Do this for me," some favor never asked before, that could only be asked on one's deathbed, would that other refuse, if he were a friend or a brother? I will do it, but tell me what it is, and make haste, said Alyosha. Make haste! Don't be in a hurry, Alyosha, you worry and worry yourself. There's no need to hurry now. Now the world has taken a new turning. Ah, Alyosha, what a pity you can't understand ecstasy. But what am I saying to him, as though you didn't understand it? What an ass I am. What am I saying? Be noble, O man. Who says that? Alyosha made up his mind to wait. He felt that perhaps, indeed, his work lay here. Mitya sank into thought for a moment, with his elbow on the table and his head in his hand. Both were silent. Alyosha, said Mitya, you're the only one who won't laugh. I should like to begin my confession with Schiller's Hymn to Joy and Die Freude. I don't know German. I only know it's called that. Don't think I'm talking nonsense because I'm drunk. I'm not a bit drunk. Brandy's all very well, but I need 2 bottles to make me drunk. Silenus with his rosy fizz upon his stumbling ass. But I've not drunk a quarter of a bottle, and I'm not Silenus. I'm not Silenus, though I am strong, for I've made a decision once for all. Forgive me the pun. You'll have to forgive me a lot more than puns today. Don't be uneasy. I'm not spinning it out. I'm talking sense, and I'll come to the point in a minute. I won't keep you in suspense. Say, how does it go? He raised his head, thought a minute, and began with enthusiasm. Wild and fearful in his cavern hid the naked troglodyte, and the homeless nomad wandered, laying waste his fertile plain. Menacing with spear and arrow, in the woods the hunter strayed. Woe to all poor wretches stranded on those cruel and hostile shores. From the peak of high Olympus came the mother Ceres down, seeking in those savage regions her lost daughter Proserpine. But the goddess found no refuge, found no kindly welcome there, and no temple bearing witness to the worship of the gods. From the fields and from the vineyards came no fruits to deck the feasts, only flesh of blood-stained victims smouldered on the altar fires. And where the grieving goddess turned her melancholy gaze, sunk in vilest degradation, man his loathsomeness displays. Mitya broke into sobs and seized Alyosha's hand. My dear, in degradation now too. There's a terrible amount of suffering for man on earth, a terrible lot of trouble. Don't think I'm only a brute in an officer's uniform, wallowing in dirt and drink. I hardly think of anything but of that degraded man. If only I'm not lying, I pray God I'm not lying and showing off. I think about that man because I am that man myself. Would he purge his soul from vileness and attain to light and worth, he must turn and cling forever to his ancient Mother Earth. But the difficulty is, how am I to cling forever to Mother Earth? I don't kiss her, I don't cleave to her bosom. Am I to become a peasant or a shepherd? I go on, and I don't know whether I'm going to shame or to light and joy. That's the trouble for everything in the world, it's a riddle. And whenever I've happened to sink into the vilest degradation, and it's always been happening, I always read that poem about Ceres and man. Has it reformed me? Never, for I'm a Karamazov. For when I do leap into the pit, I go headlong with my heels up, and am pleased to be falling in that degrading attitude, and pride myself upon it. And in the very depths of that degradation, I begin a hymn of praise. Let me be accursed, let me be vile and base, only let me kiss the hem of the veil in which my God is shrouded. Though I may be following the devil, I am thy son, O Lord, and I love thee, and I feel the joy without which the world cannot stand. Joy everlasting fostereth the soul of all creation. It is her secret ferment fires the cup of life with flame. 'Tis at her beck the grass has turned each blade towards the light, and solar systems have evolved from chaos and dark night, filling the realms of boundless space beyond the sage's sight. At bounteous nature's kindly breast all things that breathe drink joy, and birds and beasts and creeping things all follow where she leads. Her gifts to man are friends in need, the wreath, the foaming must, to angels, vision of God's throne, to insects, sensual lust. But enough poetry. I am in tears, let me cry. It may be foolishness that everyone would laugh at, but you won't laugh. Your eyes are shining too. Enough poetry. I want to tell you now about the insects to whom God gave sensual lust. To insects, sensual lust. I am that insect, brother, and it is said of me specially. All we Karamazovs are such insects. An angel as you are, that insect lives in you too, and will stir up a tempest in your blood. Tempests, because sensual lust is a tempest, worse than a tempest. Beauty is a terrible and awful thing. It is terrible because it has not been fathomed, and can never be fathomed, for God sets us nothing but riddles. Here the boundaries meet, and all contradictions exist side by side. I am a cultivated man, brother, but I've thought a lot about this. It's terrible what mysteries there are. Too many riddles weigh men down on earth. We must solve them as we can, and try to keep a dry skin in the water. Beauty! I can't endure the thought that a man of lofty mind and heart begins with the ideal of the Madonna and ends with the ideal of Sodom. What's still more awful is that a man with the ideal of Sodom in his soul does not renounce the ideal of the Madonna, and his heart may be on fire with that ideal, genuinely on fire, just as in his days of youth and innocence. Yes, man is broad, too broad indeed. I'd have him narrower. The devil only knows what to make of it. What to the mind is shameful is beauty, and nothing else to the heart. Is there beauty in Sodom? Believe me, that for the immense mass of mankind, beauty is found in Sodom. Did you know that secret? The awful thing is that beauty is mysterious as well as terrible. God and the devil are fighting there, and the battlefield is the heart of man. but a man always talks on his own ache. Listen now, to come to facts. This ends Chapter 3. Chapter 4 of the Brothers Karamazov. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoyevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. Book 3. Chapter 4. The Confession of a Passionate Heart in Anecdote. I was leading a wild life then. Father said just now that I spent several thousand rubles in seducing young girls. That's a swinish invention, and there was nothing of the sort. And if there was, I didn't need money simply for that. With me, money is an accessory, the overflow of my heart, the framework. Today she would be my lady, tomorrow a wench out of the streets in her place. I entertained them both. I threw away money by the handful on music, rioting, and gypsies. Sometimes I gave it to the ladies too, for they'll take it greedily, that must be admitted, and be pleased and thankful for it. Ladies used to be fond of me. Not all of them, but it happened. It happened. But I always liked side paths, little dark back alleys behind the main road. There one finds adventures and surprises, and precious metal in the dirt. I'm speaking figuratively, brother. In the town I was in, there were no such back alleys in the literal sense, but morally there were. If you were like me, you'd know what that means. I loved vice. I loved the ignominy of vice. I loved cruelty. Am I not a bug? Am I not a nauseous insect? In fact, a Karamazov? Once we went, a whole lot of us, for a picnic in 7 sledges. It was dark. It was winter. And I began squeezing a girl's hand, and forced her to kiss me. She was the daughter of an official, a sweet, gentle, submissive creature. She allowed me much in the dark. She thought, poor thing, that I should come next day to make her an offer. I was looked upon as a good match, too. But I didn't say a word to her for 5 months. I used to see her in a corner at dances. We were always having dances, her eyes watching me. I saw how they glowed with fire, a fire of gentle indignation. This game only tickled that insect lust I cherished in my soul. 5 months later she married an official and left the town, still angry and still perhaps in love with me. Now they live happily. Observe that I told no one. I didn't boast of it, though I am full of low desires. And love, what's low? I'm not dishonorable. You're blushing. Your eyes flashed. Enough of this filth with you, and all this was nothing much, wayside blossoms à la Paul du Coq, though the cruel insect had already grown strong in my soul. I've a perfect album of reminiscences, brother. God bless them, the darlings. I tried to break it off without quarreling, and I never gave them away. I never bragged of one of them. But that's enough. You can't suppose I brought you here simply to talk of such nonsense. No, I'm going to tell you something more curious, and don't be surprised that I'm glad to tell you instead of being ashamed. You say that because I blushed, Alyosha said suddenly. I wasn't blushing at what you were saying, or at what you've done. I blushed because I am the same as you are. You? Come, that's going a little too far. No, it's not too far, said Alyosha warmly. Obviously the idea was not a new one. The ladder's the same. I'm at the bottom step, and you're above. Somewhere above the 13th, that's how I see it. But it's all the same. Absolutely the same in kind. Anyone on the bottom step is bound to go up to the top one. Then one ought not to step on it at all. Anyone who can help it had better not, said Alyosha. But can you? I think not, said Alyosha. Hush, Alyosha. Hush, darling. I could kiss your hand, you touch me so. That rogue Grushenka has an eye for men. She told me once that she'd devour you one day. There, I won't. From this field of corruption fouled by flies, let's pass to my tragedy. also befouled by flies, that is, by every sort of vileness. Although the old man told lies about my seducing innocence, there really was something of the sort in my tragedy, though it was only once, and that it did not come off. The old man, who has reproached me with what never happened, does not even know of this fact. I never told anyone about it. You're the first. Except Ivan, of course. Ivan knows everything, but he knew about it long before you. Ivan is a tomb. Ivan's a tomb? Yes. Alyosha listened with great attention. I was a lieutenant in a line regiment, but still I was under supervision, like a kind of convict. Yet I was awfully well received in the little town. I spent money right and left. I was thought to be rich. I thought so myself. But I must have pleased them in other ways as well. Although they shook their heads over me, they liked me. My colonel, who was an old man, took a sudden dislike to me. He was always down upon me, but I had powerful friends, and moreover all the town was on my side, so he couldn't do me much harm. I was in fault myself for refusing to treat him with proper respect. I was proud. This obstinate old fellow, who was really a very good sort, kind-hearted and hospitable, had had 2 wives, both dead. His first wife, who was of a humble family, left a daughter as unpretentious as herself. She was a young woman of 24 when I was there, and was living with her father and an aunt, her mother's sister. The aunt was simple and illiterate. The niece was simple but lively. I like to say nice things about people. I never knew a woman of more charming character than Agafya. Fancy her name was Agafya Ivanovna. And she wasn't bad-looking either, in the Russian style, tall, stout, with a full figure, and beautiful eyes, though a rather coarse face. She had not married, although she had had 2 suitors. She refused them, but was as cheerful as ever. I was intimate with her. Not in that way. It was pure friendship. I have often been friendly with women quite innocently. I used to talk to her with shocking frankness, and she only laughed. Many women like such freedom. And she was a girl, too, which made it very amusing. Another thing, one could never think of her as a young lady. She and her aunt lived in her father's house with a sort of voluntary humility, not putting themselves on an equality with other people. She was a general favorite, and of use to everyone. She was a clever dressmaker. She had a talent for it. She gave her services freely without asking for payment, but if anyone offered her payment, she didn't refuse. The colonel, of course, was a very different matter. He was one of the chief personages in the district. He kept open house, entertained the whole town, gave suppers and dances. At the time I arrived and joined the battalion, all the town was talking of the expected return of the colonel's second daughter, a great beauty, who had just left a fashionable school in the capital. This second daughter is Katerina Ivanovna, and she was the child of the second wife, who belonged to a distinguished general's family. Although, as I learnt on good authority, she too brought the colonel no money. She had connections, and that was all. There may have been expectations, but they had come to nothing. Yet when the young lady came from boarding school on a visit, the whole town revived. Our most distinguished ladies, 2 excellencies and a colonel's wife, and all the rest following their lead, at once took her up and gave entertainments in her honor. She was the belle of the balls and picnics, and they got up tableaux vivants in aid of distressed governesses. I took no notice. I went on as wildly as before, and one of my exploits at the time set all the town talking. I saw her eyes taking my measure one evening at the battery commander's, but I didn't go up to her, as though I disdained her acquaintance. I did go up and speak to her at an evening party not long after. She scarcely looked at me, and compressed her lips scornfully. Wait a bit. I'll have my revenge, thought I. I behaved like an awful fool on many occasions at that time, and I was conscious of it myself. What made it worse was that I felt that Katenka was not an innocent boarding-school miss, but a person of character, proud and really high-principled. Above all, she had education and intellect, and I had neither. You think I meant to make her an offer? No, I simply wanted to revenge myself because I was such a hero, and she didn't seem to feel it. Meanwhile, I spent my time in drink and riot, till the lieutenant colonel put me under arrest for 3 days. Just at that time, father sent me 6,000 rubles in return for my sending him a deed, giving up all claims upon him, settling our accounts, so to speak, and saying that I wouldn't expect anything more. I didn't understand a word of it at that time. Until I came here, Alyosha, till the last few days, indeed, perhaps even now, I haven't been able to make head or tail of my money affairs with father. But never mind that. We'll talk of it later. Just as I received the money, I got a letter from a friend telling me something that interested me immensely. The authorities, I learnt, were dissatisfied with our lieutenant colonel. He was suspected of irregularities. In fact, his enemies were preparing a surprise for him. And then the commander of the division arrived, and kicked up the devil of a shindy. Shortly afterwards he was ordered to retire. I won't tell you how it all happened. He had enemies, certainly. Suddenly there was a marked coolness in the town towards him and all his family. His friends all turned their backs on him. Then I took my first step. I met Agafya Ivanovna, with whom I'd always kept up a friendship, and said, "Do you know there's a deficit of 4,500 rubles of government money in your father's accounts?" "What do you mean? What makes you say so? The general was here not long ago and everything was all right." "Then it was, but now it isn't." She was terribly scared. "Don't frighten me," she said. "Who told you so?" "Don't be uneasy," I said. "I won't tell anyone. You know I'm as silent as the tomb. I only wanted, in view of possibilities, to add that when they demand that 4,500 rubles from your father, and he can't produce it, he'll be tried and made to serve as a common soldier in his old age, unless you like to send me your young lady in secret. I've just had money paid me. I'll give her 4,000 if you like, and keep the secret religiously." "Ah, you scoundrel!" That's what she said. "You wicked scoundrel! How dare you!" She went away furiously indignant, while I shouted after her once more that the secret should be kept sacred. Those two simple creatures, Agafya and her aunt, I may as well say at once, behaved like perfect angels all through this business. They genuinely adored their Katya, thought her far above them, and waited on her hand and foot. But Agafya told her of our conversation. I found that out afterwards. She didn't keep it back, and of course that was all I wanted. Suddenly the new major arrived to take command of the battalion. The old lieutenant colonel was taken ill at once, couldn't leave his room for 2 days, and didn't hand over the government money. Dr. Kravchenko declared that he really was ill, but I knew for a fact, and had known for a long time, that for the last 4 years the money had never been in his hands except when the commander made his visits of inspection. He used to lend it to a trustworthy person, a merchant of our town called Trifonov, an old widower with a big beard and gold-rimmed spectacles. He used to go to the fair, do a profitable business with the money, and return the whole sum to the colonel, bringing with it a present from the fair, as well as interest on the loan. But this time I heard all about it quite perchance from Trifonov's son and heir, a drivelling youth, and one of the most vicious in the world. This time, I say, Trifonov brought nothing back from the fair. The lieutenant colonel flew to him. "I've never received any money from you, and couldn't possibly have received any." That was all the answer he got. So now our lieutenant colonel is confined to the house, with a towel round his head, while they're all 3 busy putting ice on it. All at once an orderly arrives on the scene with a book and the order to hand over the battalion money immediately, within 2 hours. He signed the book. I saw the signature in the book afterwards. Stood up, saying he would put on his uniform, ran to his bedroom, loaded his double-barreled gun with a service bullet, took the boot off his right foot, fixed the gun against his chest, and began feeling for the trigger with his foot. But Agafya, remembering what I had told her, had her suspicions. She stole up and peeped into the room just in time. She rushed in, flung herself upon him from behind, threw her arms round him, and the gun went off, hit the ceiling, but hurt no one. The others ran in, took away the gun, and held him by the arms. I heard all about this afterwards. I was at home. It was getting dusk, and I was just preparing to go out. I had dressed, brushed my hair, scented my handkerchief, and taken up my cap, when suddenly the door opened, and facing me in the room stood Katerina Ivanovna. It's strange how things happen sometimes. No one had seen her in the street, so that no one knew of it in the town. I lodged with 2 decrepit old ladies who looked after me. They were most obliging old things, ready to do anything for me, and at my request were as silent afterwards as 2 cast-iron pots. Of course, I grasped the position at once. She walked in and looked straight at me, her dark eyes determined, even defiant, but on her lips and round her mouth I saw uncertainty. "My sister told me," she began, "that you would give me 4,500 roubles if I came to you for it myself. I have come. Give me the money." She couldn't keep it up. She was breathless, frightened, her voice failed her, and the corners of her mouth and the lines round it quivered. "Alyosha, are you listening, or are you asleep?" "Mitya, I know you will tell the whole truth," said Alyosha in agitation. "I am telling it. If I tell the whole truth just as it happened, I shan't spare myself. My first idea was a Karamazov one. Once I was bitten by a centipede, brother, and laid up a fortnight with a fever from it. Well, I felt a centipede biting at my heart then. A nauseous insect, you understand? I looked her up and down. You've seen her. She's a beauty. But she was beautiful in another way then. At that moment she was beautiful because she was noble, and I was a scoundrel. She in all the grandeur of her generosity and sacrifice for her father, and I, a bug. And scoundrel as I was, she was altogether at my mercy, body and soul. She was hemmed in. I tell you frankly, that thought, that venomous thought, so possessed my heart that it almost swooned with suspense. It seemed as if there could be no resisting it, as though I should act like a bug, like a venomous spider, without a spark of pity. I could scarcely breathe. Understand, I should have gone next day to ask for her hand, so that it might end honorably, so to speak, and that nobody would or could know, for though I am a man of base desires, I'm honest. And at that very second some voice seemed to whisper in my ear, "But when you come tomorrow to make your proposal, that girl won't even see you. She'll order her coachman to kick you out of the yard. Publish it all through the town," she would say. "I'm not afraid of you." I looked at the young lady. My voice had not deceived me. That is how it would be. Not a doubt of it. I could see from her face now that I should be turned out of the house. My spite was roused. I longed to play her the nastiest, swinish cad's trick, to look at her with a sneer, and on the spot where she stood before me, to stun her with a tone of voice that only a shopman could use. 4,000! What do you mean? I was joking. You've been counting your chickens too easily, madam. 200 if you like, with all my heart. But 4,000 is not a sum to throw away on such frivolity. You've put yourself out to no purpose. I should have lost the game, of course. She'd have run away. But it would have been an infernal revenge. It would have been worth it all. I'd have howled with regret all the rest of my life, only to have played that trick. Would you believe it? It has never happened to me with any other woman, not one, to look at her at such a moment with hatred. But on my oath, I looked at her for 3 seconds, or 5 perhaps, with fearful hatred, that hate which is only a hair's breadth from love, from the maddest love. I went to the window, put my forehead against the frozen pane, and I remember the ice burnt my forehead like fire. I did not keep her long, don't be afraid. I turned round, went up to the table, opened the drawer, and took out a banknote for 5,000 roubles. It was lying in a French dictionary. Then I showed it to her in silence, folded it, handed it to her, opened the door into the passage, and stepping back, made her a deep bow. A most respectful, a most impressive bow, believe me. She shuddered all over, gazed at me for a second, turned horribly pale, white as a sheet in fact, and all at once, not impetuously, but softly, gently, bowed down to my feet, not a boarding-school curtsy, but a Russian bow, with her forehead to the floor. She jumped up and ran away. I was wearing my sword. I drew it and nearly stabbed myself with it on the spot. Why, I don't know. It would have been frightfully stupid, of course. I suppose it was delight. Can you understand that one might kill oneself from delight? But I didn't stab myself. I only kissed my sword and put it back in the scabbard. which there was no need to have told you, by the way, and I fancy that in telling you about my inner conflict I have laid it on rather thick to glorify myself. But let it pass, and to hell with all who pry into the human heart. Well, so much for that adventure with Katerina Ivanovna. So now Ivan knows of it, and you, and no one else." Dmitri got up, took a step or two in his excitement, pulled out his handkerchief and mopped his forehead, then sat down again, not in the same place as before, but on the opposite side, so that Alyosha had to turn quite round to face him. This ends chapter 4.
Book 3, Chapter 5 of the Brothers Karamazov. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kara McIntosh. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. Book 3, Chapter 5, The Confession of a Passionate Heart, Heals Up. "Now," said Alyosha, "I understand the first half." "You understand the first half. That half is a drama, and it was played out there. The second half is a tragedy, and it is being acted here." "And I understand nothing of that second half so far," said Alyosha. "And I? Do you suppose I understand it?" "Stop, Dmitri. There's one important question. Tell me, you were betrothed. Betrothed still?" "We weren't betrothed at once. Not for 3 months after that adventure. The next day I told myself that the incident was closed, concluded. It seemed to me caddish to make her an offer. On her side she gave no sign of life for the 6 weeks that she remained in the town, except indeed for one action. The day after her visit, the maid-servant slipped round with an envelope addressed to me. I tore it open. It contained the change out of the banknote. Only 4,500 roubles was needed, but there was a discount of about 200 on changing it. She only sent me about 260. I don't remember exactly, but not a note, not a word of explanation. I searched the packet for a pencil mark, and nothing. Well, I spent the rest of the money on such an orgy that the new major was obliged to reprimand me. Well, the lieutenant-colonel produced the battalion money to the astonishment of everyone, for nobody believed that he had the money untouched. He'd no sooner paid it than he fell ill, took to his bed, and, 3 weeks later, softening of the brain set in, and he died 5 days afterwards. He was buried with military honors, for he had not had time to receive his discharge. 10 days after his funeral, Katerina Ivanovna, with her aunt and sister, went to Moscow. And behold, on the very day they went away, I hadn't seen them, didn't see them off or take leave. I received a tiny note, a sheet of thin blue paper, and on it only one line in pencil. "I will write to you. Wait. K." And that was all. I'll explain the rest now in 2 words. In Moscow, their fortunes changed with the swiftness of lightning and the unexpectedness of an Arabian fairy tale. That general's widow, their nearest relation, suddenly lost the 2 nieces who were her heiresses and next of kin. Both died in the same week of smallpox. The old lady, prostrated with grief, welcomed Katya as a daughter, as her one hope, clutched at her, altered her will in Katya's favor. But that concerned the future. Meanwhile, she gave her, for present use, 80,000 roubles as a marriage portion to do what she liked with. She was an hysterical woman. I saw something of her in Moscow later. Well, suddenly I received by post 4,500 roubles. I was speechless with surprise, as you may suppose. 3 days later came the promised letter. I have it with me now. You must read it. She offers to be my wife, offers herself to me. "I love you madly," she says. "Even if you don't love me, never mind. Be my husband, don't be afraid. I won't hamper you in any way. I will be your chattel. I will be the carpet under your feet. I want to love you forever. I want to save you from yourself." Alyosha, I am not worthy to repeat those lines in my vulgar words and in my vulgar tone, my everlasting vulgar tone, and I can never cure myself of it. That letter stabs me even now. Do you think I don't mind, that I don't mind still? I wrote her an answer at once, but it was impossible for me to go to Moscow. I wrote to her with tears. One thing I shall be ashamed of forever. I referred to her being rich and having a dowry, while I was only a stuck-up beggar. I mentioned money. I ought to have borne it in silence, but it slipped from my pen. Then I wrote at once to Ivan, and told him all I could about it in a letter of 6 pages, and sent him to her. Do you look like that? Why do you look like that? Why are you staring at me? Yes, Ivan fell in love with her. He's in love with her still. I know that. I did a stupid thing in the world's opinion, but perhaps that one stupid thing may be the saving of us all now. Ooh, don't you see what a lot she thinks of Ivan? How she respects him? When she compares us, do you suppose she can love a man like me, especially after all that has happened here? But I'm convinced that she does love a man like you, and not a man like him. She loves her own virtue, not me. The words broke involuntarily and almost malignantly from Dmitri. He laughed, but a minute later his eyes gleamed. He flushed crimson and struck the table violently with his fist. I swear, Alyosha, he cried, with intense and genuine anger at himself, you may not believe me, but as God is holy and as Christ is God, I swear that though I smiled at her lofty sentiments just now, I know that I am 1,000,000 times baser in soul than she, and that these lofty sentiments of hers are as sincere as a heavenly angel's. That's the tragedy of it, that I know that for certain. What if anyone does show off a bit? Don't I do it myself? Yet I'm sincere. I'm sincere. As for Ivan, I can understand how he must be cursing nature now, with his intellect too, to see the preference given to whom, to what, to a monster who, though he is betrothed and all eyes are fixed on him, can restrain his debaucheries, and before the very eyes of his betrothed. And a man like me is preferred, while he is rejected. And why? Because a girl wants to sacrifice her life and destiny out of gratitude. It's ridiculous. I've never said a word of this to Ivan, and Ivan, of course, has never dropped a hint of the sort to me, but destiny will be accomplished, and the best man will hold his ground while the undeserving one will vanish into the back alley forever. His filthy back alley, his beloved back alley, where he is at home, and where he will sink in filth and stench at his own free will and with enjoyment. I've been talking foolishly. I've no words left. I use them at random, but it will be as I have said. I shall drown in the back alley, and she will marry Ivan. Stop, Dmitri, Alyosha interrupted again with great anxiety. There's one thing you haven't made clear yet. You are still betrothed all the same, are you not? Can you break off the engagement if she, your betrothed, doesn't want to? Yes, formally and solemnly betrothed. It was all done on my arrival in Moscow, with great ceremony, with icons, all in fine style. The general's wife blessed us, and, would you believe it, congratulated Katya. You've made a good choice, she said. I see right through him. And, would you believe it, she didn't like Ivan, and hardly greeted him. I had a lot of talk with Katya in Moscow. I told her about myself, sincerely, honorably. She listened to everything. There was sweet confusion, there were tender words. Though there were proud words too. She wrung out of me a mighty promise to reform. I gave my promise, and here. What? Why, I called to you and brought you out here today. This very day, remember it, to send you, this very day again, to Katerina Ivanovna, and to tell her that I shall never come see her again. Say, he sends you his compliments. But is that possible? That's just the reason I'm sending you in my place, because it's impossible, and how could I tell her myself? And where are you going? To the back alley. To Grushenka, then, Alyosha explained mournfully, clasping his hands. Can Rakitin really have told truth? I thought you had just visited her, and that was all. Can a betrothed man pay such visits? Is such a thing possible, with such a betrothed, and before the eyes of all the world? Confound it, I have some honor. As soon as I began visiting Grushenka, I ceased to be betrothed, and to be an honest man. I understand that. Why do you look at me? You see, I went in the first place to beat her. I had heard, and I know for a fact now, that captain, father's agent, had given Grushenka an IOU of mine for her to sue me for payment, so as to put an end to me. They wanted to scare me. I went to beat her. I had had a glimpse of her before. She doesn't strike one at first sight. I knew about her old merchant, who's lying ill now, paralyzed, but he's leaving for a decent little sum. I knew, too, that she was fond of money, that she hoarded it, and lent it at a wicked rate of interest, that she's a merciless cheat and swindler. I went to beat her, and I stayed. The storm broke. It struck me down like the plague. I'm plague-stricken still, and know that everything is over. There will never be anything more for me. The cycle of the ages is accomplished. That's my position, and though I'm a beggar, as fate would have it, I had 3,000 just then in my pocket. I drove with Grushenka to Mokroe, a place 25 versts from here. I got gypsies there and champagne and made all the peasants there drunk on it, and all the women and girls. I sent the thousands flying. In 3 days' time I was stripped bare, but a hero. Do you suppose the hero had gained his end? Not a sign of it from her. I tell you that rogue Grushenka has a supple curve all over her body. You can see it in her little foot, even in her little toe. I saw it and kissed it. But that was all, I swear. "I'll marry you if you like," she said. "You're a beggar, you know. Say that you won't beat me, and you will let me do anything I choose, and perhaps I will marry you." She laughed, and she's laughing still. Dmitri leapt up with a sort of fury. He seemed all at once as though he were drunk. His eyes became suddenly bloodshot. "And do you really mean to marry her?" "At once, if she will, and if she won't, I shall stay all the same. I'll be the porter at her gate, Alyosha," he cried. He stopped short before him, and taking him by the shoulders, began shaking him violently. "Do you know, you innocent boy, that this is all delirium, senseless delirium? For there's a tragedy here. Let me tell you, Alexei, that I must be a low man, with low and degraded passions, but a thief and a pickpocket Dmitri Karamazov never can be. Well then, let me tell you that I am a thief and a pickpocket." That very morning, just before I went to beat Grushenka, Katerina Ivanovna sent for me, and in strict secrecy, why I don't know, I suppose she had some reason, asked me to go to the chief town of the province and to post 3,000 roubles to Agafya Ivanovna in Moscow, so that nothing should be known of it in the town here. So I had that 3,000 roubles in my pocket when I went to see Grushenka, and it was that money we spent at Mokroe. Afterwards I pretended I had been to the town, but did not show her the post-office receipt. I said I had sent the money and would bring the receipt, and so far I haven't brought it. I've forgotten it. Now what do you think you're going to her today to say? He sends his compliments, and she'll ask you, what about the money? You might still have said to her, he's a degraded sensualist and a low creature with uncontrolled passions. He didn't send your money then, but wasted it because, like a low brute, he couldn't control himself. But still you might have added, isn't a thief though. Here is your 3,000. He sends it back. Send it to Agafya Ivanovna. But he told me to say he sends his compliments. But as it is, she will ask, but where is the money? Mitya, you are unhappy, yes, but not as unhappy as you think. Don't worry yourself to death with despair. What, do you suppose I'd shoot myself because I can't get 3,000 to pay back? That's just it. I shan't shoot myself. I haven't the strength now. Afterwards, perhaps. But now I'm going to Grushenka. I don't care what happens. And what then? I'll be her husband if she deigns to have me. And when lovers come, I'll go into the next room. I'll clean her friends' galoshes, blow up their samovar, run their errands. Katerina Ivanovna will understand it all, Alyosha said solemnly. She'll understand how great this trouble is, and she will forgive. She has a lofty mind, and no one could be more unhappy than you. She'll see that for herself. She won't forgive anything, said Dmitri with a grin. There's something in it, brother, that no woman could forgive. Do you know what would be the best thing to do? What? Pay back the 3,000. Where can we get it from? I say I have 2,000. Ivan will give you another 1,000. That makes 3. Take it and pay it back. And when would you get it, your 3,000? You're not of age. Besides, and you absolutely must take my farewell to her today, with money or without it, for I can't drag on any longer. Things have come to such a pass. Tomorrow is too late. I shall send you to father. To father? Yes, to father first. Ask him for 3,000. But Mitya, he won't give it. As though he would. I know he won't. Do you know the meaning of despair, Alexei? Yes. Listen, legally he owes me nothing. I've had it all from him, I know that. But morally he owes me something, doesn't he? You know he started with 28,000 of my mother's money and made 100,000 with it. Let him give me back only 3 of the 28,000, and he'll draw my soul out of hell, and it will atone for many of my sins. For that 3,000 I shall give you solemn word, I'll make an end of everything, and he shall hear nothing more of me. For the last time I give him the chance to be a father. Tell him God himself sends him this chance. Mitya, he won't give it for anything. I know he won't. I know it perfectly well. Now especially. That's not all. I know something more. Now only a few days ago, perhaps only yesterday, he found out for the first time in earnest, underline in earnest, that Grushenka is really perhaps not joking, and really means to marry me. He knows her nature. He knows the cat. Do you suppose he's going to give me money to help to bring that about when he's crazy about her himself? And that's not all either. I can tell you more than that. I know that for the last 5 days he has had 3,000 drawn out of the bank, changed into notes of 100 rubles, packed into a large envelope, sealed with 5 seals, and tied across with red tape. You see how well I know all about it? On the envelope is written, "To my angel Grushenka, when she will come to me." He scrawled it himself in silence and in secret, and no one knows that the money is there except the valet, Smerdyakov, whom he trusts like himself. So now he has been expecting Grushenka for the last 3 or 4 days. He hopes she'll come for the money. He has sent her word of it, and she has sent him word that perhaps she'll come. And if she does go to the old man, can I marry her after that? You understand now why I'm here in secret, and what I'm on the watch for. For her? Yes, for her. Foma has a room in the house of these sluts here. Foma comes from our parts. He was a soldier in our regiment. He does jobs for them. He's a watchman at night, and goes grouse shooting in the daytime, and that's how he lives. I've established myself in his room. Neither he nor the women of the house know the secret that is, that I am on the watch here. No one but Smerdyakov knows then. No one else. He will let me know if she goes to the old man. It was he told you about the money then? Yes, it's a dead secret. Even Ivan doesn't know about the money, or anything. The old man is sending Ivan Chermishnaya on a 2 or 3 days' journey. A purchaser has turned up for the copse. He'll give 8,000 for the timber, so the old man keeps asking Ivan to help him by going to arrange it. It will take him 2 or 3 days. That's what the old man wants, so that Grushenka can come while he's away. Then he's expecting Grushenka today. No, she won't come today. There are signs. She's certain not to come, cried Mitya suddenly. Smerdyakov thinks so too. Father's drinking now. He's sitting at a table with Ivan. Go to him, Alyosha, and ask for the 3,000. Mitya, dear, what's the matter with you? Cried Alyosha, jumping up from his place and looking keenly at his brother's frenzied face. For one moment the thought struck him that Dmitri was mad. What is it? I'm not insane, said Dmitri, looking intently and earnestly at him. No fear. I'm sending you to father, and I know what I'm saying. I believe in miracles. In miracles? In a miracle of divine providence. God knows my heart. He sees my despair. He sees the whole picture. Surely he won't let something awful happen. Alyosha, I believe in miracles. Go. I'm going. Tell me, will you wait for me here? Yes. I know it will take some time. You can't go at him point blank. He's drunk now. I'll wait 3 hours, 4, 5, 6, 7. Only remember you must go to Katerina Ivanovna today, if it has to be at midnight, with the money or without the money, and say he sends his compliments to you. I want you to say that verse to her. He sends his compliments to you. Mitya, and what if Grushenka comes today? If not today, or the next day? Grushenka? I shall see her. I shall rush out and prevent it. And if there's an if, it will be murder. I couldn't endure it. Who will be murdered? The old man. I shan't kill her. Brother, what are you saying? Oh, I don't know. Perhaps I shan't kill, and perhaps I shall. I'm afraid that he will suddenly become so loathsome to me with his face at that moment. I hate his ugly throat, his eyes, his nose, his shameless snigger. I feel a physical repulsion. That's what I'm afraid of. That's what may be too much for me. I'll go, Mitya. I believe that God will order things for the best, that nothing awful may happen. And I will sit and wait for the miracle. And if it doesn't come to pass... Alyosha went thoughtfully towards his father's house. End of chapter 5.
Chapter 6 of the Brothers Karamazov. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoyevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. Book 3. Chapter 6. Smerdyakov. He did in fact find his father still at table. Though there was a dining room in the house, the table was laid as usual in the drawing room, which was the largest room, and furnished with old-fashioned ostentation. The furniture was white and very old, upholstered in old red silky material. In the spaces between the windows there were mirrors in elaborate white and gilt frames, of old-fashioned carving. On the walls, covered with white paper, which was torn in many places, there hung 2 large portraits, one of some prince who had been governor of the district 30 years before, and the other of some bishop, also long since dead. In the corner opposite the door there were several icons, before which a lamp was lighted at nightfall, not so much for devotional purposes, as to light the room. Fyodor Pavlovitch used to go to bed very late, at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and would wander about the room at night, or sit in an armchair thinking. This had become a habit with him. He often slept quite alone in the house, sending his servants to the lodge, but usually Smerdyakov remained, sleeping on a bench in the hall. When Alyosha came in, dinner was over, but coffee and preserves had been served. Fyodor Pavlovitch liked sweet things with brandy after dinner. Ivan was also at table, sipping coffee. The servants Grigory and Smerdyakov were standing by. Both the gentleman and the servant seemed in singularly good spirits. Fyodor Pavlovitch was roaring with laughter. Before he entered the room, Alyosha heard the shrill laugh he knew so well, and could tell from the sound of it that his father had only reached the good-humoured stage, and was far from being completely drunk. "Here he is! Here he is!" yelled Fyodor Pavlovitch, highly delighted at seeing Alyosha. "Join us! Sit down! Coffee is a Lenten dish, but it's hot. I don't offer you brandy, you're keeping the fast. But would you like some? No, I'd better give you some of our famous liqueur. Smerdyakov, go to the cupboard, the second shelf on the right. Here are the keys. Look sharp." Alyosha began refusing the liqueur. "Never mind. If you won't have it, we will," said Fyodor Pavlovitch, beaming. "But stay, have you dined?" "Yes," answered Alyosha, who had in truth only eaten a piece of bread and drunk a glass of kvass in the Father Superior's kitchen, "though I should be pleased to have some hot coffee." "Bravo, my darling! He'll have some coffee. Does it want warming? No, it's boiling. It's capital coffee. Smerdyakov's making. My Smerdyakov's an artist at coffee, and at fish patties, and at fish soup too. You must come one day and have some fish soup. Let me know beforehand. But stay. Didn't I tell you this morning to come home with your mattress and pillow and all? Have you brought your mattress?" "No, I haven't," said Alyosha, smiling too. "Ah, but you were frightened. You were frightened this morning, weren't you? There, my darling, I couldn't do anything to vex you. Do you know, Ivan, I can't resist the way he looks one straight in the face and laughs. It makes me laugh all over. I'm so fond of him. Alyosha, let me give you my blessing, a father's blessing." Alyosha rose, but Fyodor Pavlovitch had already changed his mind. "No, no," he said. "I'll just make the sign of the cross over you for now. Sit still. Now we've a treat for you. In your own line, too. It'll make you laugh. Balaam's ass has begun talking to us here. And how he talks, how he talks!" Balaam's ass, it appeared, was the valet, Smerdyakov. He was a young man of about 24, remarkably unsocial and taciturn. Not that he was shy or bashful. On the contrary, he was conceited, and seemed to despise everybody. But we must pause to say a few words about him now. He was brought up by Grigory and Marfa, but the boy grew up with no sense of gratitude, as Grigory expressed it. He was an unfriendly boy, and seemed to look at the world mistrustfully. In his childhood he was very fond of hanging cats, and burying them with great ceremony. He used to dress up in a sheet as though it were a surplice, and sang and waved some object over the dead cat as though it were a censer. All this he did on the sly, with the greatest secrecy. Grigory caught him once at this diversion, and gave him a good beating. He shrank into a corner and sulked there for a week. "He doesn't care for you or me, the monster," Grigory used to say to Marfa, "and he doesn't care for anyone. Are you a human being?" he said, addressing the boy directly. "You're not a human being. You grew from the mildew in the bath-house, that's what you are." Smerdyakov, it appeared afterwards, could never forgive him those words. Grigory taught him to read and write, and when he was 12 years old began teaching him the scriptures. But this teaching came to nothing. At the second or third lesson the boy suddenly grinned. "What's that for?" asked Grigory, looking at him threateningly from under his spectacles. "Oh, nothing. God created light on the first day, and the sun, moon, and stars on the 4th day. Where did the light come from on the first day?" Grigory was thunderstruck. The boy looked sarcastically at his teacher. There was something positively condescending in his expression. Grigory could not restrain himself. "I'll show you where!" he cried, and gave the boy a violent slap on the cheek. The boy took the slap without a word, but withdrew into his corner again for some days. A week later he had his first attack of the disease to which he was subject all the rest of his life, epilepsy. When Fyodor Pavlovitch heard of it, his attitude to the boy seemed changed at once. Till then he had taken no notice of him, though he never scolded him, and always gave him a kopeck when he met him. Sometimes, when he was in good humor, he would send the boy something sweet from his table. But as soon as he heard of his illness, he showed an active interest in him, sent for a doctor, and tried remedies, but the disease turned out to be incurable. The fits occurred on an average once a month, but at various intervals. The fits varied, too, in violence. Some were light, and some were very severe. Fyodor Pavlovitch strictly forbade Grigory to use corporal punishment to the boy, and began allowing him to come upstairs to him. He forbade him to be taught anything whatever for a time, too. One day when the boy was about 15, Fyodor Pavlovitch noticed him lingering by the bookcase and reading the titles through the glass. Fyodor Pavlovitch had a fair number of books, over 100, but no one ever saw him reading. He at once gave Smerdyakov the key to the bookcase. "Come, read. You shall be my librarian. You'll be better sitting reading than hanging about the courtyard. Come, read this," said Fyodor Pavlovitch, gave him Evenings in a Cottage near Dikanka. He read a little but didn't like it. He did not once smile, and ended by frowning. "Why? Isn't it funny?" asked Fyodor Pavlovitch. Smerdyakov did not speak. "Answer, stupid." "It's all untrue," mumbled the boy with a grin. "Then go to the devil. You have the soul of a lackey. Stay, here's Smaragd's Universal History. That's all true. Read that." But Smerdyakov did not get through 10 pages of it. He thought it dull, so the bookcase was closed again. Shortly afterwards, Marfa and Grigory reported to Fyodor Pavlovitch that Smerdyakov was gradually beginning to show an extraordinary fastidiousness. He would sit before his soup, take up his spoon and look into the soup, bend over it, examine it, take a spoonful and hold it to the light. "What is it, a beetle?" Grigory would ask. "A fly, perhaps," observed Marfa. The squeamish youth never answered, but he did the same with his bread, his meat, and everything he ate. He would hold a piece on his fork to the light, scrutinize it microscopically, and only after long deliberation decide to put it in his mouth. "Ugh! What fine gentleman's airs!" Grigory muttered, looking at him. When Fyodor Pavlovitch heard of this development in Smerdyakov, he determined to make him his cook, and sent him to Moscow to be trained. He spent some years there, and came back remarkably changed in appearance. He looked extraordinarily old for his age. His face had grown wrinkled, yellow, and strangely emasculate. In character he seemed almost exactly the same as before he went away. He was just as unsocial, and showed not the slightest inclination for any companionship. In Moscow, too, as we heard afterwards, he had always been silent. Moscow itself had little interest for him. He saw very little there, and took scarcely any notice of anything. He went once to the theatre, but returned silent and displeased with it. On the other hand, he came back to us from Moscow well dressed, in a clean coat and clean linen. He brushed his clothes most scrupulously twice a day invariably, and was very fond of cleaning his smart calf boots with a special English polish, so that they shone like mirrors. He turned out a first-rate cook. Fyodor Pavlovitch paid him a salary, almost the whole of which Smerdyakov spent on clothes, pomade, perfumes, and such things. But he seemed to have as much contempt for the female sex as for men. He was discreet, almost unapproachable with them. Fyodor Pavlovitch began to regard him rather differently. His fits were becoming more frequent, and on the days he was ill, Marfa cooked, which did not suit Fyodor Pavlovitch at all. "Why are your fits getting worse?" asked Fyodor Pavlovitch, looking askance at his new cook. "Would you like to get married? Shall I find you a wife?" But Smerdyakov turned pale with anger and made no reply. Fyodor Pavlovitch left him with an impatient gesture. The great thing was that he had absolute confidence in his honesty. It happened once, when Fyodor Pavlovitch was drunk, that he dropped in the muddy courtyard 300-ruble notes, which he had only just received. He only missed them next day, and was just hastening to search his pockets, when he saw the notes lying on the table. Where had they come from? Smerdyakov had picked them up and brought them in the day before. "Well, my lad, I've never met anyone like you," Fyodor Pavlovitch said shortly, and gave him 10 rubles. We may add that he not only believed in his honesty, but had for some reason a liking for him, although the young man looked as morosely at him as at everyone and was always silent. He rarely spoke. If it had occurred to anyone to wonder at the time what the young man was interested in, and what was in his mind, it would have been impossible to tell by looking at him. Yet he used sometimes to stop suddenly in the house, or even in the yard or street, and would stand still for 10 minutes, lost in thought. A physiognomist studying his face would have said that there was no thought in it, no reflection, but only a sort of contemplation. There is a remarkable picture by the painter Kromskoy called The Contemplation. There is a forest in winter, and on a roadway through the forest, in absolute solitude, stands a peasant in a torn kaftan and bark shoes. He stands, as it were, lost in thought. Yet he is not thinking. He is contemplating. If anyone touched him, he would start and look at one as though awakening and bewildered. It's true he would come to himself immediately, but if he were asked what he had been thinking about, he would remember nothing. Yet probably he has, hidden within himself, the impression which had dominated him during the period of contemplation. Those impressions are dear to him, and no doubt he hoards them imperceptibly, and even unconsciously. How and why, of course, he does not know either. He may suddenly, after hoarding impressions for many years, abandon everything and go off to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage for his soul's salvation, or perhaps he will suddenly set fire to his native village, and perhaps do both. There are a good many contemplatives among the peasantry. Well, Smerdyakov was probably one of them, and he probably was greedily hoarding up his impressions, hardly knowing why. This ends chapter 6.
Book 3, Chapter 7 of the Brothers Karamazov. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Father Ziley of Detroit. The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoyevsky. Translated by Constance Garnett. Book 3, Chapter 7, The Controversy. But Balaam's ass had suddenly spoken. The subject was a strange one. Grigory had gone in the morning to make purchases, and had heard from the shopkeeper, Lukyanov, the story of a Russian soldier which had appeared in the newspaper of that day. This soldier had been taken prisoner in some remote part of Asia, and was threatened with an immediate agonizing death if he did not renounce Christianity and follow Islam. He refused to deny his faith, and was tortured, flayed alive, and died, praising and glorifying Christ. Grigory had related the story at table. Fyodor Pavlovitch always liked, over the dessert after dinner, to laugh and talk, if only with Grigory. This afternoon he was in a particularly good-humored and expansive mood. Sipping his brandy and listening to the story, he observed that they ought to make a saint of a soldier like that, and to take his skin to some monastery. That would make the people flock and bring the money in. Grigory frowned, seeing that Fyodor Pavlovitch was by no means touched, but as usual was beginning to scoff. At that moment, Smerdyakov, who was standing by the door, smiled. Smerdyakov often waited at table towards the end of dinner, and since Ivan's arrival in our town he had done so every day. "What are you grinning at?" asked Fyodor Pavlovitch, catching the smile instantly and knowing that it referred to Grigory. "Well, my opinion is," Smerdyakov began suddenly and unexpectedly in a loud voice, "that if that laudable soldier's exploit was so very great, there would have been, to my thinking, no sin in it if he had on such an emergency renounced, so to speak, the name of Christ and his own christening, to save by that same his life for good deeds. by which, in the course of years, to expiate his cowardice. How could it not be a sin? You're talking nonsense. For that you'll go straight to hell and be roasted there like mutton, put in Fyodor Pavlovitch. It was at this point that Alyosha came in, and Fyodor Pavlovitch, as we have seen, was highly delighted at his appearance. "We're on your subject, he chuckled gleefully, making Alyosha sit down to listen. "As for mutton, that's not so, and there'll be nothing there for this, and there shouldn't be either, if it's according to justice," Smerdyakov maintained stoutly. "How do you mean, according to justice?" Fyodor Pavlovitch cried, still more gaily, nudging Alyosha with his knee. "He's a rascal, that's what he is," burst from Grigory. He looked Smerdyakov wrathfully in the face. "As for being a rascal, wait a little, Grigory Vassilyevitch," answered Smerdyakov with perfect composure. "You'd better consider yourself that once I am taken prisoner by the enemies of the Christian race, and they demand from me to curse the name of God and to renounce my holy christening, I am fully entitled to act by my own reason, since there would be no sin in it." "But you've said that before. Don't waste words. Prove it," cried Fyodor Pavlovitch. "Soup-maker," muttered Grigory contemptuously. "As for being a soup-maker, wait a bit too, and consider for yourself, Grigory Vassilyevitch, without abusing me. For as soon as I say to those enemies, 'No, I'm not a Christian, and I curse my true God,' then at once, by God's high judgment, I become immediately and specially anathema cursed, and am cut off from the Holy Church exactly as though I were a heathen, so that at the very instant, not only when I say it aloud, but when I think of saying it, before a quarter of a second has passed, I am cut off. Is that so or not, Grigory Vassilyevitch?" He addressed Grigory with obvious satisfaction, though he was really answering Fyodor Pavlovitch's questions, and was well aware of it, and intentionally pretending that Grigory had asked the questions. "Ivan!" cried Fyodor Pavlovitch suddenly, "stoop down for me to whisper. He's got this all up for your benefit. He wants you to praise him. Praise him." Ivan listened with perfect seriousness to his father's excited whisper. "Stay, Smerdyakov, be quiet a minute," cried Fyodor Pavlovitch once more. "Ivan, your ear again." Ivan bent down again with a perfectly grave face. "I love you as I do Alyosha. Don't think I don't love you. Some brandy?" "Yes, but you're rather drunk yourself," thought Ivan, looking steadily at his father. He was watching Smerdyakov with great curiosity. "You're anathema, accursed as it is!" Grigory suddenly burst out. "And how dare you argue, you rascal, after that, if—" "Don't scold him, Grigory, don't scold him!" Fyodor Pavlovitch cut him short. "You should wait, Grigory Vassilyevitch, if only a short time, and listen, for I haven't finished all I had to say. For at the very moment I become accursed, at that same highest moment I become exactly like a heathen, and my christening is taken off me, and becomes of no avail. Isn't that so?" "Make haste and finish, my boy," Fyodor Pavlovitch urged him, sipping from his wine-glass with relish. "And if I have ceased to be a Christian, then I told no lie to the enemy when they asked whether I was a Christian or not a Christian, seeing I had already been relieved by God himself of my Christianity by reason of the thought alone, before I had time to utter a word to the enemy. And if I have already been discharged, in what manner and in what sort of justice can I be held responsible as a Christian in the other world for having denied Christ, when, through the very thought alone before denying him, I had been relieved from my christening? If I'm no longer a Christian, then I can't renounce Christ, for I've nothing then to renounce. Who will hold an unclean Tartar responsible, Grigory Vassilyevitch, even in heaven, for not having been born a Christian? And who would punish him for that, considering that you can't take two skins off one ox? For God Almighty himself, even if he did make the Tartar responsible, when he dies, would give him the smallest possible punishment, I imagine, since he must be punished, judging that he is not to blame if he has come into the world an unclean heathen from heathen parents. The Lord God can't surely take a Tartar and say he was a Christian. That would mean that the Almighty would tell a real untruth. And can the Lord of heaven and earth tell a lie, even in one word? Grigory was thunderstruck and looked at the orator, his eyes nearly staring out of his head. Though he did not clearly understand what was said, he had caught something in this rigmarole, and stood looking like a man who has just hit his head against a wall. Fyodor Pavlovitch emptied his glass and went off into his shrill laugh. "Alyosha! Alyosha! What do you say to that? Ah, you casuist! You must have been with a Jesuit somewhere, Ivan. Oh, you stinking Jesuit! Who taught you? But you're talking nonsense, you casuist! Nonsense! 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 Don't cry, Grigory. We'll reduce him to smoke and ashes in a moment. Tell me this, O ass! You may be right before your enemies, but you have renounced your faith all the same in your own heart, and you say yourself, in that very hour you became anathema, accursed. And if once you're anathema, they won't pat you on the head for it in hell. What do you say to that, my fine Jesuit? There's no doubt that I have renounced it in my own heart, but there's no special sin in that. Or if there was sin, it was the most ordinary. How's that the most ordinary? You lie, accursed one, hissed Grigory. Consider yourself, Grigory Vassilyevich, Smerdyakov went on, staid and unruffled, conscious of his triumph, but, as it were, generous to the vanquished foe. Consider yourself, Grigory Vassilyevich. It is said in the Scripture that if you have faith even as a mustard seed, and bid a mountain move into the sea, it will move without the least delay at your bidding. Well, Grigory Vassilyevich, if I am without faith, and you have so great faith that you are continually swearing at me, you try yourself telling this mountain not to move into the sea, for that's a long way off, but even to our stinking little river which runs at the bottom of the garden. You'll see for yourself that it won't budge, but will remain just where it is, however much you shout at it. And that shows, Grigory Vassilyevich, that you haven't faith in the proper manner, and only abuse others about it. Again, taking into consideration that no one in our day, not only you, but actually no one, from the highest person to the lowest peasant, can shove mountains into the sea, except perhaps some one man in the world, or at most two, and they most likely are saving their souls in secret somewhere in the Egyptian desert, so you wouldn't find them. If so it be, if all the rest have no faith, will God curse all the rest? That is, the population of the whole earth, except about 2 hermits in the desert, and his well-known mercy, will he not forgive one of them? And so I'm persuaded that though I may once have doubted, I shall be forgiven if I shed tears of repentance. Stay, cried Fyodor Pavlovitch in a transport of delight. So, you do suppose there are 2 who can move mountains? Ivan, make a note of it. Write it down. There you have the Russian all over. You're quite right in saying it's characteristic of the people's faith, Ivan asserted with an approving smile. You agree? Then it must be so if you agree. It's true, isn't it, Alyosha? That's the Russian faith all over, isn't it? No, Smerdyakov has not the Russian faith at all, said Alyosha firmly and gravely. I'm not talking about his faith. I mean those 2 in the desert. Only that idea. Surely that's Russian, isn't it? Yes, that's purely Russian, said Alyosha, smiling. Your words are worth a gold piece, O ass, and I'll give it to you today. But as to the rest, you talk nonsense, nonsense, nonsense. Let me tell you, stupid, that we here are all of little faith, only from carelessness, because we haven't time. Things are too much for us. And, in the second place, the Lord God has given us so little time, only 24 hours in the day, so that one hasn't even time to get sleep enough, much less to repent of one's sins. While you have denied your faith to your enemies, when you'd nothing else to think about but to show your faith, so I consider, brother, that it constitutes a sin. Constitutes a sin it may, but consider yourself, Grigory Vassilyevich, that it only extenuates it if it does not constitute. If I had believed then in very truth, as I ought to have believed, then it really would have been sinful if I had not faced tortures for my faith, and had gone over to the pagan Mohammedan faith. But of course it wouldn't have come to torture then, because I should only have had to say at that instant to the mountain, "Move and crush the tormentor," and it would have moved, and at the very instant have crushed him like a black beetle, and I should have walked away as though nothing had happened, praising and glorifying God. But suppose at that very moment I had tried all that, and cried to the mountain, "Crush these tormentors," and it hadn't crushed them. How could I have helped doubting, pray, at such a time, and at such a dread hour of mortal terror? And apart from that, I should know already that I could not attain to the fullness of the kingdom of heaven, for since the mountain had not moved at my word, they could not think very much of my faith up aloft, and there could be no very great reward awaiting me in the world to come. So why should I let them flay the skin off me as well, and to no good purpose? For even though they had flayed my skin half off my back, and even then the mountain would not have moved at my word or at my cry, and at such a moment not only doubt might come over one, but one might lose one's reason from fear, so that one would not be able to think at all. And therefore, how should I be particularly to blame, if not seeing my advantage or reward there or here, I should at least save my skin. And so, trusting fully in the grace of the Lord, I should cherish the hope that I might be altogether forgiven. End of chapter 7. Recording by Father Ziley.